Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Gonzalez. I am a researcher in Iowa State University in the Plant Pathology, Entomology, and Microbiology department. And this presentation is part of the rules for fungicide stewardship, and I'll be talking about the use of fungicide label rates at the right timing. So this concept of rules is a way to think about things that we can do to prevent the development of fungicide resistance in fungal pathogens. So there are several ways that we can think about fungicide stewardship, but again, for this presentation, I'll focus on the use of optimal dose rates and the application of a fungicide in appropriate time. For the rates, we're going to talk about looking at the label, and we're going to see a couple of parts of the label that we can pay attention to make sure that we use the appropriate rates. And then we're going to look at the actual spraying of a fungicide to make sure that we are targeting the appropriate timing for doing an application. So the label is more than a paper, is the law, so we should comply to what we find in a label of a chemical, of a fungicide. Here to the right, you can see a made-up label that it serves as an example. And with the numbers in red, I'm showing certain parts that we should be familiar with. So with the number 1, I'm showing the chemical name. So this is the name of the product that the fungicide that you have has. So it will show you the name and the concentration of the active ingredient. So this is a very important part to look at, especially because there are several products that could have the same active ingredient, but if they're different products or different brands, they could have different concentrations. Then we have the common name, which is related to the chemical name, but it's just a different way of calling it. And with the number 3, we have the trade name, which is basically what the company that sells the product decided to name the fungicide. In this case, it's called Myco Crusher Max EC. And then for the number 4, we see a very important number, which is the Fungicide Resistant Action Committee code, or FRAC code for short, which is a way that we have to organize fungicides according to their mode of action. So it's very important to know which type of fungicide we are using to promote adequate use and fungicide stewardship. If we keep digging into the label, we will find a section that is called directions for use, which is very important because that's where you will find the rate, the recommended rate of the product to use, depending on the crop that you're using, and depending on the disease that you're targeting, and the equipment that you're planning to apply the product with. So in the label, we can find the appropriate volume and rates to use. But usually these rates are not given in a single number. They're usually a range, both for the volume to use and for the rate of the product to use. And the product rate is sometimes given as a percentage or depending on the volume to use, or also can be found as an amount of product to use in an area. So it will give you the rate to apply in an acre or a hectare, for example. It's very important to know what the appropriate rates to use are, especially because there are similar products that can have different rates. Even products that can have the same active ingredients could have different concentrations and could have different rates. Then another aspect to keep in mind here is that good coverage is key. And I want to mention here that appropriate use of fungicide and promoting fungicide stewardship go hand in hand with appropriate control of the diseases. For good coverage, we should think about appropriate droplet size and using an adjuvant to promote the best coverage that we can when doing an application of a fungicide. So there are several moving parts here. That's why I would like to recommend that you consult with local experts so you can have the best advice on what rate to use according to the crop that you have, the disease that you're targeting, and the product that you're using with the equipment that you are going to apply. And a good example of this is a case that happened a couple of years ago here in Iowa, where a farmer did an application with a drone in his cornfield, and when he was combining at harvest, he noticed a pattern of strips or bands in his field, and that's where he noticed that there was a failure in the coverage on his application, because there were plants that were clear, that were the leaf were not infected with tar spot, and then there were strips of the field that were basically darker, as you can see in the photo to the right, which were plants where the coverage was not adequate and they were heavily infected with tar spot. Okay, now I would like to move on to the timing part of this short video. And I would like us to think about timing of a fungicide through the lens of the disease triangle. And for those that are not familiar with the disease triangle, it is composed by three components: the pathogen or the causal agent of the disease, which is the organism that causes the disease. It is also composed by the crop or the host, and the environmental conditions that surround the crop and that can be conducive or not for disease. So from the pathogen perspective, we should be aware of what is the risk of infection. For this is useful to know the field history. For example, if we have had a foliar disease in the past, that the inoculum may be present in the current season, that's something that will affect the risk of infection, as other factors too. Then we should know about what is the potential economic loss of having an epidemic of a given disease at different points of the season, to know what is the risk and how warranted an application will be. It's very important to scout the field and be aware of what you find in your field, and also to stay informed so you can be aware of local epidemics that might be starting, if there's any disease moving northward, or if there's any local farms that have been observing a given disease that you should be aware of. Then in the crop part, it's important to know what is the genetic resistance of the seed that you have. You should know if your crop is susceptible, tolerant, or resistant to a given foliar disease, so you can have a better informed decision package, so you can decide if an application is needed and when. Then usually, if you have higher yield potential in a field, it's sometimes related to having high risk of an epidemic from developing, because high yield potential sometimes is correlated with the appropriate conditions for an epidemic to occur. Then we should think about also active growth. So if you do an application at a given moment and you have active growth, we should consider that the new growth that came after the application is probably not protected. It will be not protected by the application that you did in the past. So you should know if this is something that you should consider for future applications or not. Also, it's important to understand what growth stages of your crop are more susceptible to a disease, to define what is the best timing to apply a fungicide or not. The last part is the environment. So we should be aware of if there are any cultural practices that might affect the conditions that could provide a good situation for a disease to develop. For example, if you're a no-till farm, or if you run some kind of tilling, that could affect the amount of inoculum of some diseases that can affect your farming practice. Also, we should pay attention on what are the environmental conditions in the season, so you are aware if there are any of these conditions that are favorable for disease development. Okay, so an example of timing and a tricky concept that sometimes you see out there is the idea of that there are fungicides that are preventative versus fungicides that are curative. So here's an example of a study done by Dr. Darren Miller, and he was looking at the effect of 5 fungicides on the development of lesions on rust in sunflower. So he had 5 fungicides: a strovirulin, called azoxystrobin. Then he had a protectant, the fungicide chlorothalonil, and then 3 triazoles, which were miclobutanil, propiconazole, and triadimefon. So he applied the products 15, 10, 5, 1 day, and 1 hour before inoculating the plants with the rust. And in this case, the strobilurin protected the plant even if applied 15 days before the inoculation. For the rest of the products, the trend shows that the farthest away they were applied from the inoculation time, the least control they exerted, which is something that is expected. But then if we look at the um, what happened when the fungicides were applied after the inoculation, we still see that the strobilurin provides good control. The protectant chlorothalonil falls short. Even 1 day after application, it does not control the disease. And the trend for the three triazoles is that the farthest away they were applied from the inoculation time, the least control they provided. And this is especially concerning for the triadimephone, which was not great at controlling the disease, even applied 3 days after the inoculation. And this contradicts some of the information that we see for other diseases where the triazoles are considered to be curative fungicides and the strobis are considered to be preventative fungicides. So what I'm trying to say is that the term of preventative and curative, it's not always applicable to all pathosystems or to all diseases on crops. Okay, now I would like to take a moment to talk about some consequences that we could see from using an inadequate rate or not targeting the right timing for doing an application. So if we apply a product at a rate that is not ideal, or if we miss an optimal spray window for an application, we could see a poor disease control. And in this case, we will be promoting the increase of the population of a pathogen in a field, which can translate in economic loss. Also, if we use rates that are above the optimal rate, we could cause some phytotoxicity in our crop, and we could incur in economic loss also by using resources in a way that is not efficient. Also, if we don't follow the adequate rates or timing, we could be increasing the risk of development of fungicide resistance strains in our fungal population. So all of these things are ways that we should think about to try to keep a fungal population being sensitive to a fungicide and avoid to push this population from being sensitive to being resistant to a fungicide. Because if that happens, then we will lose a key tool for disease management that we really can be that can really affect the integrated disease management plan in the future. So some take-home messages from what I just said. It's very important to read and understand the fungicide label and also consult with local experts to make sure that you're using the adequate rates when using a fungicide. It's also important to stay informed about what are the main epidemics that might be occurring and also what are the key moments to apply a fungicide. I recommend you to think about timing of a fungicide application from the disease triangle perspective, and also make sure that you understand what are the properties of the fungicide that you are using so you can make the best decision when doing a fungicide application. And if you have any questions, there's my email if you want to reach out. And also I encourage you to visit the website of the Crop Protection Network, where there's a lot of useful information. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time and see you next time.